How many steps?
23.
I need to talk about something Victor does that nobody on this show and nobody in this fandom has stopped to think about.
Victor, I want to talk to you about what...
You'll mess
He
everything
measures
up.
distance from the trees, not the faraway trees, the supernatural hollow ones that transport you, the regular trees,
I think they moved a little.
the ordinary forest trees, standing around the places where he lives and sleeps, the trees that every other resident in Fromville walks past without a second thought. Because why would you think twice about a pine tree? Victor thinks twice. Victor thinks constantly. Watch him around the edges of the town, around Colony House, around the tree line, around the spaces where the forest meets the places people live. He keeps a specific distance from those trunks, a deliberate, practiced gap, not the caution of a man who is afraid of the forest. It is the precision of a man who knows exactly where the safe line is, and that line is measured in steps from the nearest tree. And here's the thing that got me. Why would a man who has lived in this town for over 40 years, who has survived longer than anyone on screen, be measuring the distance between himself and ordinary trees? Unless those trees are not as ordinary as they look. Unless those trees move, not dramatically, not walking across the forest like something out of a fairy tale, something much smaller and much worse. A slow, imperceptible drift, inches across months, the kind of movement so subtle that no resident who has been here for a year, or 2, or even 5, would ever notice. But a man who has been here for over 40 years, he would notice.
You've been here a pretty long time, huh?
I've been here the longest. For a long time, there was nobody else here but me.
And if what I am about to lay out holds up, he may be the only person in that town who understands that when the trees around you change position, even by a little, the town is tightening, and something terrible is about to happen. Here is the theory in one sentence. The forest around Fromville is not static. The trees surrounding the town are slowly, imperceptibly closing in, shrinking the livable space over time. And Victor has been tracking that encroachment for over 4 decades, because he figured out that the forest's advance correlates with the town's cycles of violence and massacre. When the tree line is farther from the buildings, the town is in a resting phase, relatively stable, relatively survivable. When the trees creep closer, when the forest contracts inward toward the center of town, the entity's grip tightens, the monsters get bolder, the rules start bending, the safe zones shrink, and eventually, the forest has closed in so far that there is almost no room left, and the cycle ends in slaughter. What if Victor's constant distance measuring is not a quirk or a trauma response? What if it is a surveillance system? The only countdown clock in Fromville, and the only person who can read it, has been dismissed as an eccentric for 4 decades. Think about how every other character interacts with the forest that surrounds Fromville. Boyd patrols the perimeter, looking for threats, monsters, movement, danger. The residents avoid the forest at night because of what lives inside it. Newcomers learn quickly that the tree line is a boundary. Daylight side is yours, dark side belongs to them. But notice what those residents are watching for. They are watching for creatures, for movement in the shadows, for something coming out of the forest. Victor is not watching for something coming out. Victor is watching the forest itself. There is a difference between a man who scans the tree line for danger and a man who looks at the trees and checks whether they are where they are supposed to be. Victor does the second thing. He looks at those trees the way a homeowner looks at a crack in the foundation, not with the panic of someone who sees a spider, but with the quiet, measuring focus of someone who has been watching that crack widen for years and is trying to calculate how much time is left before the wall fails. If the trees were fixed, if the forest boundary never changed, then Victor would have no reason to keep checking. He would have established the safe distance once, decades ago, and never thought about it again. The fact that he is still measuring, still calibrating, still adjusting his position relative to those tree trunks after all this time suggests that the thing he is measuring keeps changing. The forest is not where it was when Victor first arrived. It is closer, and he knows by how much. One of the quietest recurring details across 4 seasons is that Fromville feels compressed. New arrivals remark on how small the town is. Characters who have been there for a while describe a sense of the space tightening, of the walls closing in, of there being less room than there used to be. Most viewers interpret this as psychological cabin fever, claustrophobia, the emotional weight of being trapped. But what if it is literal? What if the livable space inside Fromville is actually physically shrinking? Not because the buildings are moving, but because the forest is advancing. If the tree line creeps inward by even a few inches a month, You would not notice it day to day. The forest would look the same. The path to the tree line would feel the same. But over months, over years, over decades, those inches add up. A clearing that was 100 feet wide when Victor was a child might be 80 feet wide now. A gap between two trees that used to let light through might be dense and dark. And here is what makes this possibility quietly terrifying. If the forest is the entity's body, its perimeter, its skin, its boundary, then the trees closing in is not a natural process. It is the entity swallowing. The town is not a cage, the residents are locked inside. It is a mouth that is slowly closing. The trees are the teeth. And every inch they advance is another inch of space the residents lose. Another inch of safe ground surrendered to whatever the forest represents. Victor would be the only one who could see this, because he is the only one who has been here long enough to notice the difference between the forest of 1985 and the forest of now. Everyone else arrived too recently. They accept the tree line at its current position, because they have never known it anywhere else. Victor has, and the distance he keeps from those trees is not arbitrary. It is the updated perimeter, the current safe line, recalculated across 4 decades of watching the forest close in. Victor draws. He has always drawn. His sketchbook is treated by the show as a window into his memory, and possibly into the town's future. But look at what he actually puts on paper. Not just creatures and faces. He draws places, landscapes, tree lines, clearings, the edges of the forest, the spaces where the town meets the woods. What if some of those drawings are not art or memory? What if they are records? Consider the possibility that Victor has been sketching the same views, the same tree lines, the same clearings, the same angles of the forest, from the same vantage points, repeatedly, across years. Not because he is obsessed with the scenery, but because he is documenting changes. A drawing of the tree line from Colony House made 10 years ago, compared to one made today, would show the difference. The trees would be slightly closer, the clearing slightly narrower, the forest slightly thicker. If that is what his drawings contain, then they are not illustrations. They are the most valuable documents in Fromville, a 40-year visual record of the forest's advance, drawn by a man nobody takes seriously enough to ask what his pictures actually mean. And here is where this possibility connects to something larger. If the forest is advancing from all directions equally, closing in toward the center of town, then at some point the tree lines from all sides will converge. The forest will meet itself at the middle, and the shape that convergence creates, the shape of all those advancing tree lines, traced inward from every direction, might form a pattern. What if Victor has already drawn that pattern? What if somewhere in his sketchbook there is a drawing of what the tree lines look like when they all reach the center? And what if that drawing looks like the symbol Jade has been losing his mind over? Not tree roots, not legs, a convergence diagram. The shape the forest makes when it finishes closing in. The last frame before the mouth shuts. Every cycle in Fromville ends the same way. People arrive, they build something, they survive for a while, and then eventually almost everyone dies. The town resets, new people arrive. The process starts again. Nobody on the show has identified what triggers the massacre. The residents assume it is the monsters. The monsters seem to follow some internal clock. The fandom has debated whether it is a sacrifice, a ritual, a quota of suffering, or a decision made by the entity at the top. But what if the trigger is not a decision at all? What if it is mechanical? What if the massacre happens when the forest reaches a critical threshold, when the trees have advanced so far inward that the livable space shrinks below a sustainable limit? At that point, the safe zones are too small. He measures the distance because the distance is the clock, and the clock does not stop. So the next time you watch From, I want you to pay attention to something you have probably never noticed. Watch Victor around the edges of town. Not what he says, not where he is going. Watch his positioning. Watch how he places himself relative to the nearest trees. Watch the moment he adjusts, the small step inward, the half correction that puts a little more space between him and a trunk. Watch how automatic it is, how practiced, how 40 years of repetition have turned it into something that looks like instinct, but might actually be the most disciplined measurement routine on the show. That is not a man being cautious. That is a man who has been watching the forest close in for over 4 decades, step by step, inch by inch, and who knows, in his bones, in his drawings, in the quiet calculations he has never shared with anyone. Roughly how much space is left. The trees are not where they used to be, Victor knows, and the shape they are closing into, the shape the forest will make when it finishes swallowing the town, might be the same shape the dead children have been pointing at since before anyone alive today was born. The question is not whether the cycle is going to end. The question is how many inches are left.